My name is Jill Phillips, and I'm the creator of Whose Shoes, a popular approach to co-production. I was named as an HSJ 100 wildcard and want to help give a voice to others, talking about their ideas and experiences. I'll be chatting with people from all sorts of different perspectives, walking in their shoes. If you are interested in the future of healthcare and like to hear what other people think, or perhaps even contribute at some point, Whose Shoes Wildcard is for you. I'm so excited about this podcast episode. Today I'm talking to Rachael Grimaldi, the founder of CardMedic and one of the most inspirational movers and shakers I've ever met. Rachael is also a lovely, warm, generous human being, always connecting and encouraging others. She's a mum, a doctor, a clinical entrepreneur, and I've loved following her amazing journey since we first became aware of each other's work at the start of the pandemic. So welcome to Wildcard Whose Shoes, Rachael. You are indeed a wildcard. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what's important to you?
Oh, Jill, thank you so much for that introduction. That was amazing and so sweet of you to say. Well, I mean, I think you kind of covered a little bit about my background of, being a mum. I've got 3 very young children. Being a doctor, I'm an anaesthetist as well. I'm currently near the end of my training. I'm at Royal Surrey at the moment, and then I'm starting at Great Ormond Street Hospital in February to do my advanced paediatric anaesthetics, and then I'll finally be finished. One of my other hats is I am the Associate Medical Director for the Brighton Marathon and lead the research group there and lead with the integration of ECMO, which is heart and lung bypass, but at the roadside into our advanced cardiac arrest team. And then, as you mentioned, I co-founded CardMedic last year at the start of the pandemic. So I wear a few hats. But kind of what's important to me, I mean, very much on a personal level, family is obviously, I think, at the heart of everything. My husband, my children, my parents, in-laws, and kind of extended family, siblings and things are really important, and friends. And then kind of from a professional standpoint, I think equality, I've always had a really strong sense of what feels just and what feels fair. So I think for me, equality and inclusion is kind of very important to me. And through the course of my clinical practice, I've always cared deeply about communicating with patients and making sure that they're receiving the best quality of care we can give them, the safest care we can give them, and that they always, I remember my mum saying growing up that one of her doctors that she saw growing up, she said that every time she saw him, he would make her feel like she was the only person he'd seen that day. And I think I've carried that with me, that's how I wanted to practice, is always make people feel like they're the only patient that matters. They're the only person I've seen that day. They're the most important person. So I think, that kind of equality and inclusion has been very important to me throughout my training and my career so far.
I think that's such a lovely thing. The only person you've seen today, clearly everyone knows it's not, but that feeling, how you make people feel is central to good care, isn't it? And compassionate care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think, when people come, it doesn't matter what the healthcare setting is. I get so scared when I go to the dentist, and I've never even had a filling, but I get so scared. And my dentist is so gentle, and I think it doesn't matter whether that's the GP, the dentist, the hospital, an outpatient clinic, an antenatal appointment. Even if you have all the knowledge in the world or no knowledge about that specialty, everyone comes in with a certain amount of anxiety and fear around seeking healthcare intervention, even if it's something that is just a checkup or something you're being discharged for, whatever it might be. There's always, I think, a certain amount of apprehension that people bring. And I think our job, doesn't matter what kind of healthcare or allied healthcare professional you are, is to make people feel at ease and like they can open up and trust you as well.
So I think what you've just said then about good communications and dispelling fear and anxiety and making things as human as they can be, that is absolutely central to CardMedic, isn't it? So in terms of, the PPE and the situation and the fear at the beginning of the pandemic, the unknown, Do you want to talk about CardMedic and where it all came from? Because it's just the most amazing story.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, I have to say it's been an absolutely enormous team effort. There's, from across the UK actually and internationally, there's no way I could have done this by myself at all. But yeah, I mean, essentially, CardMedic itself is a communication app or a communication support tool, if you like. So it's a platform that helps healthcare staff communicate with patients to overcome any barrier. So that could be deafness, blindness, a language barrier, learning disabilities, any range of cognitive impairments or literacy issues or illiteracy. But basically, yeah, where it all started was I was on maternity leave last year. It was at the very start of it wasn't, the pandemic hadn't started when I went away on maternity leave, but I was visiting family abroad in February. And at the start of March, it was clear that things were starting to kick off, and we tried to get home, but we couldn't. Our flights were cancelled 7 times. We were out in the States. We ended up there for nearly 6 months, but I was really desperate to help. I spent the first week really quite emotional about being an anaesthetist, knowing that my skills were relevant for the front line, knowing I tried to help in the States, but I'm not qualified. So, really figuring out what could I do to make a difference. And I came across an article in the news about a patient who'd been to intensive care with COVID. And like you said, that PPE created this big barrier to communication. And that patient was terrified. He was, I think, in his 30s. He'd been interviewed on Sky News and BBC, I think, and had no communication issues normally, but felt really terrified because he couldn't understand healthcare staff. And I think what COVID and what PPE did was suddenly create this global crisis in communication in healthcare. And all of a sudden, people who didn't previously struggle were really struggling to understand staff. So I thought, well, people must be writing notes on paper. And what if I put those notes on a website, kind of replicated them, a bit like a pre-written script? Because we do often say the same things to patients on the whole. When you're explaining things, you often explain it in the same way. There are, of course, times you need to adapt it, but lots of things do follow a relatively standard script in many ways. So I thought, well, if I put them on a website, then staff could access them and show the patient the note on a screen, and it would guide the interaction. So it was concept to launch in 72 hours. And my husband, who's not medical, we've been together 20 years. His background is e-commerce and amongst other things, built the website. And we launched and then shared it with a few friends. And I really thought that's where it would end. But actually, within a day, we were encouraged to join Twitter, which I was quite skeptical about because I just didn't, not been on Twitter before. And I didn't really kind of understand, what the audience was or how it worked. But I'm so pleased I did, not least of all because our paths have crossed. But actually, what happened when I joined Twitter was within those first 3 weeks, we ended up with 8,000 users in 50 countries. And it was just organic word of mouth. And I think the feedback that we got from staff and patients and carers from across the world was that there are so many long-standing barriers to good communication in healthcare, which we know about from practicing all the time on the front line. But, language barriers, deafness, blindness, cognitive impairment, learning disabilities, illiteracy, and that these hugely impact patient experience and care. So the feedback was, please, could we have CardMedic as a tool? Then it kind of went from there. We've spent the last 18 months building it, developing it, working with clinicians across the UK, an incredible group of speech and language therapists and learning disability nurses who've been hugely dedicated and supporting us convert the content to easy read. It's now a website and an app. And we've done lots of other bits and pieces along the way with it as well. So yeah, that's kind of where it came from, its initial ideas.
So I think in terms of the lemon light bulbs that I try and build into this series, working together, working in collaboration, however amazing any individual is, there's no way you could do that on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of energy that you've collected and the networking and the collaboration and, bringing your husband in, which is something that's familiar to me. So in terms of where we came together, it was very, very early in the pandemic, wasn't it? You were suddenly going from 0 to 60 with CardMedic, and we were trying to develop at the time virtual Who's Shoes. So my husband, who's very much got an IT background, had really come to the party with that. And at the beginning of our virtual Who's Shoes series during the pandemic, we were just trying to collect examples of good practice. Everything was so difficult and people were scared, but hey, in the meantime, so and so's doing this and so's doing that.
Mhm.
And the scenario I built in for CardMedic was simply brilliant. Now, I think the simplicity of it is what I saw. And, I think you'd said, Rachel, when we've chatted before, that you couldn't believe that something like this didn't already exist, because it's such a simple, powerful idea that will clearly make a difference to so many people.
Yeah, I think that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. And I think there was definitely an element also of imposter syndrome and I think that's something that a lot of people have. In fact, I was just on I was mentioning before, She Loves Tech boot camp, which has been absolutely fantastic. But the session we just had, one of the quotes that came up was that 1 in 2 women have imposter syndrome, which is present a lot of the time. So I know it's really common, and I've definitely had it, medical practice, especially starting out. And when I started this, I thought, how can this not have been done before, and how could it be me that's thought of it? Because it is so simple, and the platform is designed to be really intuitive and really easy and really simple to use. But I think the feedback we've over the last year, we've had 50,000 people visiting the website, we've had 22,000 app downloads, and through that, the kind of international media coverage we've had, and the research that we've done, is that it doesn't exist in this format. There isn't anything that pulls together all of these flexible communication solutions under one roof. But it's taken a kind of a long time to go, okay, so the idea did come from me, but like you said, it's a whole team effort, and it's taken expertise from many people. From the clinical forefront, we've had midwives, obstetricians, audiologists, radiographers, speech and language therapists, critical care nurses, learning disability nurses, other doctors. I mean, it's just, and the list goes on, of people that have come forward who love the mission. And the social impact side is definitely something I'd like to touch on at some point, but really love the mission of reducing health inequities and improving health literacy globally. And I think people really believe in that idea, and it's something that we massively, massively care about, that this is tech for good. And it's not just the kind of clinical side, it's the figuring out the business side. I went on an accelerator called The Hill, run by Oxford University Hospitals, which was absolutely brilliant. And if there are any clinical entrepreneurs listening, or clinicians with innovative ideas, definitely apply for The Hill. I'm also on the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, which has been brilliant. And I think their applications, they close tomorrow, I think. So this might not go out quite in time. But they've been brilliant. And I've done a US Mass Challenge Accelerator, which was really good. That just finished. And I'm doing another one, She Loves Tech, which is the world's largest startup competition for women in technology. It's an absolutely fantastic community of women all around the world who are in technology, who are all we've all had really similar experiences of journeys along this route. But it takes a team to do this, definitely.
So I'd already seen you as a fantastic networker. Your network must be going just crazy now. And I'm thinking of some of the lovely people who've helped bring us together. So
Mm.
Claire Cox
Mm-hmm.
and, some of those
Yes.
early connections we had,
And Helen
really
Hughes.
fantastic people. And Helen Hughes, Claire that I met through my work with the Darcy Fellows,
Yeah.
and Helen obviously at Patient Safety Learning,
Mm-hmm.
sharing these, helping connect us all and sharing these innovative ideas, really.
Mm.
And also as a contributor, I think, to, you mentioned midwives and obstetricians
Mm-hmm.
and so on. Katie Eves was someone that we worked with
Yes.
really closely in Brighton to put together our maternity Whose
Mm-hmm.
Shoes event in Brighton. These are people who go the extra mile, aren't they?
And Flo as well.
And Flo,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it might be worth jumping at this point. I saw a couple of days ago on Twitter, I've had this thing called Intentional Coffee that we've been pushing
Mm-hmm.
with Dr. Mary Salama, who's a fantastic paediatrician
Yes.
in Birmingham.
She's on the Clinical Entrepreneur Programme as well.
Is she? Wow.
Yes, she is. Yeah, we keep meaning to meet. Yeah.
So Mary will be delighted about this, but Sunita Sharma is basically
Mhm.
our postnatal guru for the whole MatX movement. She's my go-to person at Chelsea and Westminster
Mhm.
Hospital. And I saw just 2 days ago on Twitter, so we're talking about how Twitter brings us together.
Mhm.
Sunita, I'm really delighted that she's doing some work around personalised discharge letters.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the two of you are now going to connect. Now, trust you,
Yeah.
Rachel, you've taken it a step further. We've got to have intentional hot chocolate now.
I know, exactly. Sorry, I don't feel very British. I don't drink tea or coffee. I just don't like the flavour, but I will have an intentional hot chocolate, that's for sure.
So Sunita, again, is someone I really recommend that you connect with. And
Mm,
who knows, I'm hoping through this podcast, in terms of linking people, that at some point further down the line, we could even have a sort of three-way conversation.
mm,
Some of these things that we just don't know how they're going to evolve. But I
mhm,
think key message is to be open to not knowing what the next steps quite are, but just linking with the right people who've got those shared values and shared objectives, really.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I was really excited when I saw you done that on Twitter. And you have been such an advocate for CardMedic and for me, and such a support over the last year plus to nearly 18 months. So thank you so much. And I used to work clinically with Claire on intensive care when I was doing my intensive care rotations, and she's always been absolutely, as you can imagine, fantastic with patients and clinically amazing. And she's doing wonderful work now in patient safety as well. And Helen is such an inspiration from patient safety learning. She's just a force of nature. So yeah, I love the group of women that you've brought together as well through doing all of this. I think if we could do some kind of big group podcast, that would be so exciting.
Wouldn't that be
Mm.
amazing? Yeah, it would.
Mm.
And I was thinking, perhaps going back to what you were saying before, you were talking about all those statistics in terms of CardMedic and how it grew globally, and how many languages and so on. But I
Mm.
know when we put together that original Simply Brilliant scenario for the
Mhm.
the Who Shoes session, I think it was the one we did around inequalities and how people were
Yes.
disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And I've looked back at that scenario, and a little extract from it. My mum does not speak good English, particularly when she's distressed or in pain, but her doctor helped her by using these simple digital flashcards to find out how to make her more comfortable. And I think one thing that we've all learned through our work is the storytelling, taking it down to that sort of individual level about what difference it makes to somebody and to their family,
Mm.
starts to put it in context, doesn't it? In terms of something that might have massive, it's a bit like, if you hear about something terrible like an earthquake and you hear
Mm.
about big numbers
Mhm.
affected, but then you start to hear about how it affected a certain family, or people can just relate more, can't they? And hopefully understand more about what you're doing and why it's important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, hearing that is just, I think it makes all the kind of the long days, long nights, weekends, the 100-hour weeks all worthwhile when you feel like you're making a difference to people. And I think, far preceding CardMedic, I think, like you said, it's getting down to that granular personal level. I remember doing a night shift once, I think it was probably quite a junior registrar at the time, but we had a chap on intensive care who had learning disabilities, was I think in his 50s, who needed an emergency operation out of hours. And normally he had his family, his sisters with him, who would support him because he had some quite severe learning disabilities. But it was 3 a.m. They obviously weren't present, but I remember he needed to come to theatre, and I thought this is probably going to be quite distressing for him. So he had a hospital passport with him, as patients often do who come in with learning disabilities and things. And so I read that and I thought, what can I learn about him that he won't be able to tell me? And I read that he liked watching trains come in and out of stations. So I thought, this has got to be on YouTube. There's going to be someone I'm sure has filmed trains coming in and out of stations. So I looked it up, and sure enough, there were. And so I set up the anesthetic room with the help of my ODP, and we had the lights turned off, and we had just videos coming, of trains going in and out of stations. And thankfully he already had drips in, so we were able just to gently drift him off to sleep while he was just watching videos, and it was all really calm. And I was actually inspired by one of my consultants, who's very sadly no longer with us. It was the kind of the way he behaved with patients as well, that really personalized care, like you said, that's really trying to make a difference to one person at a time, that kind of inspired me. And I remember that his family, when they learned about us, because I was on night, so I didn't see his family or get to tell them, but somehow the message got through to them, and they were just so grateful that we'd kind of taken the time to do that and learn that about him. But for me, it was just one patient coming through, but they were my patient and they were my responsibility, and it was my job to make sure that they were feeling as safe and as reassured as possible, and they weren't scared by anything going on around them. And I think carrying that through to CardMedic has been really important, that kind of culture and that ethos. And then I think going back a bit more, I guess, to the bigger picture again is the social impact side of what we're doing, of wanting that culture to be not just helping patients and their families across the UK, but globally, and that CardMedic is a kind of tech for good and making a positive social impact. And so we're currently working with refugees in Kenya with the Step Up One Foundation and Kakuma Refugee Camp. We're working with some incredible refugees, paying them to do some of our translation work for us. And we really want to support female entrepreneurs and healthcare entrepreneurs in developing countries when we're in a position to financially, to provide them with grants for whatever kind of businesses they're looking to set up, or pay to fund training for community health workers for refugee camps, to support humanitarian crises, to subsidize CardMedic's use in developing countries. So it's not just something we kind of say. We genuinely, we're working with refugees now. We really care deeply about that. And so whilst I kind of have come at this very much as a clinician with no business background, and talking about money makes me feel uncomfortable. It costs money to do this stuff. It's expensive. We've been very lucky to have 2 Innovate UK grants, and we're very grateful to Innovate UK. We could not have done this without them. And we've since had some angel investment and things, but it's hugely expensive doing this stuff. And we're working with Inclusive Fruit, who are the sign language company, to do our sign language, etc. But I think part of the message that we're always keen to share is that although CardMedic needs to generate revenue, and University Hospital Sussex is our beacon site for that, and we're working with other trusts across the UK. Although it needs to generate revenue, it's really important that people understand our culture is that we want that revenue to grow the business, but to be used for kind of a tech for good as well, to support developing countries and refugees and things as well overseas.
And the conversation could go in 2 ways at this point, because this is where, it's the kind of thing that we get chatting and my mind's going off on one. And so I'm thinking of 2 different things. I'm thinking I want you to say a little bit more about your beacon site, but I don't want to lose what I was already thinking about. I'm very, very excited, Rachel, that one of the podcast guests I've got coming up imminently at the moment, very, very special, a little bit different perhaps from the other ones I'm doing, which is more about the podcast theme really is around quality improvement in the NHS in the UK, health and wellbeing in the UK and so on. Well, this podcast guest is different, and it's Dr. Alice Ladur. And Alice has used Who's Shoes. Now, I don't know if you know this. Alice has used Who's Shoes with men in Uganda to make a difference in terms of their understanding and attitudes towards why women need antenatal care, why they need hospital care. They're not ill, they haven't got malaria. I've learned so much about it, but obviously only just dipping in and touching the surface. And I met Alice, and basically we agreed that she could use Who's Shoes in this way, and we translated the cards into Luganda, the local language. And so I can't help thinking that at some point for you and Alice to perhaps just have an intentional hot chocolate, or in fact Alice likes coffee because she came to a Who's Shoes workshop in London when we were first planning the project, and we had a coffee together, and we ended up this lovely, and this is just completely off piece now, but she had a beautiful little beaded bag that apparently there are lots of in Uganda, but I just admired it. And she said, Jill, I want you to have it. And which was just so amazing. And then we came out, and I can't remember whether Alice hadn't been very long in the UK at that point. It was chucking it down with rain, as it so often does. And I happened to have 2 little compact umbrellas in my handbag, just because my handbag's normally such a unsorted mess.
Mary Poppins bag.
And a Mary Poppins bag. And Alice had one of the umbrellas, and so we did our bit of exchanging.
She sounds incredible. That sounds amazing. That there's someone on She Loves Tech at the moment, a group called Reach 52, that are trying to reach 52% of the world's population who don't have access to primary healthcare. I think they would also be a really good fit. It would be amazing to kind of get us all together and to be able to talk about these issues. And I think what you've touched on there is the cultural issues as well, or not necessarily issues, but just people's cultures. How do people do things differently? And we know in our country the importance of antenatal care, for example, as amongst many other different types of healthcare. But culturally, if you come from a place where it's not accepted or not part of the cultural norm, then of course morbidity or mortality for women and their babies is far greater, much higher. So it's really important to work with local communities to understand why their culture is the way that it is, but explain that that there is associated morbidity and mortality, and how can we work with that culture locally to maybe explain the importance of, whilst respecting cultural practice, that there might be some things that they could reframe and rethink that would improve the health and well-being of their mums and babies in that country. So that sounds like a really powerful way of doing it, through Whose Shoes, because I think that you're getting people to kind of, like, the ideas come from them. I think often when people have their own ideas, they're more likely to, if it's come from themselves, they're more likely to go with it than if they feel like someone's telling them what to do, if that makes sense.
Well, absolutely. I think we're all like that, aren't we? And that,
Mm.
again, within this series, the idea of, we need to invent it here
Mhm.
was something that came up with a podcast I did with Carol Munt a couple of weeks ago. And, how to get through that in terms of, well, a good idea is a good idea, but people do like to own things themselves,
Mhm.
don't they? I mean, I
Yeah.
think picking up on what you just said, something like nutrition,
Mhm.
it's scientifically known that certain things will be helpful, certain nutrients and so on. So it's about education, isn't it? But like you say,
Mhm.
respecting cultures. And I know some of the work that Alice found, that the couples were going off to the market afterwards to buy healthy food together because they understood that
Mm.
that was important for the pregnancy. And
Mhm.
again, coming back to Sunita and what I was saying
Mhm.
about, it's only what I've seen from Twitter. I haven't spoken to her recently. I must catch up with Sunita. But the personalised discharge letters, again,
Mhm.
they would be picking up on things like iron or folic acid or something that that individual who's perhaps had blood loss needs to know about for their health and well-being.
Mhm.
So to use that idea of making communication easier in different languages.
Mm. And like you said, making it relevant for people, because I think if it looks standardized, people are just more likely to dismiss it, or it's not relevant to me, or I'm healthy, I don't need to know these sorts of things, or whatever it might be. I think if people have, if you have that personal touch, you feel like that discharge letter is meant for you. It's
Yes,
telling
yeah.
you've lost blood, or you had preeclampsia, we need to monitor your blood pressure. I mean, obviously we're using kind of obstetric examples, but there will be many others. I think people are far more likely to take on board and absorb the content of that letter and follow its advice, I would hope. They feel like it's been tailored for them.
And I think the example that you gave with the young man with the train spotting, watching
Yes.
trains, that kind of sums it up for me because it's a non-medical example.
Mm,
It's just tapping into humanity, somebody's personal interests,
mhm,
and making them feel comfortable. And I think hopefully the work that we're both doing is trying to pull in that direction of personalised care
mm,
and simple things that can make a difference.
I hope, yeah, I really hope so. I feel like with CardMedic, with the best will in the world, we would love to always be able to provide translators, speech and language therapists, learning disability nurses, signers in person at the point of care, wherever that might be for every person. But there isn't the finance and there isn't the resource for it. And so there is a huge gap in service provision. And people often rely on friends, family, staff, and other kind of mechanisms to translate content, for example. And that's what we want to do, is bridge that gap and to support patients and staff, like you say, be able to communicate, feel like they've got that personal interaction, and feel safe at the end of the day. And I hope with all the wonderful people you've spoken about, everyone's these incredible collective efforts across the UK, coming from all sorts of allied healthcare professionals, charities, organizations, and across the world, who are working in this space to improve patient experience, quality of care, safety, improving health equity and health literacy. I just think the kind of collective power of good is hopefully what's going to make the difference for our patients now and in the future.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on that. And that's an inspirational kind of like call out for people to keep doing what they're doing and, grow these communities and just do the best we all can, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there anything else, Rachel, that you were burning to say as part of this podcast today?
I think we've covered so much ground. I've just thank you for your support, and I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible with Whose Shoes and then with this podcast. And you are a force of nature, genuinely. I just think what you do on Twitter is unbelievable. What you stand for, the people that you bring together, the ideas you've got, the creativity. Obviously, Mr. Whose Shoes, the wonderful Colin in the background as well. I think I think it's a massive inspiration, and I think for women as well to see the female leadership is also really important. I think at the very start of my journey with CardMedic, I remember saying completely unintentionally, it wasn't something I sought out at all, but just the number of women who came together to support me, was unbelievable and really was really inspiring. And I still have so many women, working together for this cause. And I think you're very much at the forefront of leading that for us in healthcare. So thank you so much.
Well, that's really, really kind, Rachel. What do I say, really? We're just doing our best, aren't we? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think the imposter syndrome, I wouldn't be surprised if it's 100%. It's certainly
Yes.
you and me, but we're bashing through it. And
Yes, we are. We'll get there.
okay, well, thank you so much, Rachel. Keep in touch, keep doing what you're doing, and we look forward to the next steps with everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please subscribe now to hear more of these fascinating conversations on your favourite podcast platform, and please leave a review. I tweet as Whose Shoes. Thank you for being on this journey with me, and let's hope that together we can make a difference.